Welcome to our session, and thanks for spending time with us to learn more about how we think about migration, modernization, and DevSecOps. My name is Matt Giardari, and I'm with the AWS Marketplace running DevOps, security, and observability for the AWS Marketplace. And it's my pleasure to be joined by Ivneet Kaur, the CTO for Silicon Valley Bank. My job, and you'll know that I did a good job if this turns out to be true, is really to do what we do best here at AWS and give our customers a voice. So as we pride ourselves on being the Earth's most customer-centric organization, and so to keep up that theme, you'll be learning mostly from my esteemed co-presenter. I'm going to provide a little bit of context, though, around what we mean when we talk about migration, modernization, and DevSecOps. For our agenda today, just briefly to set your expectations on how we've structured our joint talk, I'll be covering a bit about the journey to the cloud, and that's sort of a typical pitch that we give on how customers tend to migrate to the cloud and what that looks like. And then a little bit on DevSecOps, so there's a little bit of an equation here, kind of a cutesy equation, security and compliance, and then development and operations, right? It's all a combination of those things working really well together in an automated fashion. And then finally, we will get to the most important part of the presentation, which is Ivneet talking about Silicon Valley Bank's DevSecOps strategy and cloud operating models. So before we get into the major themes alluded to in the title of the prezo, I wanted to mention that the reason we work with customers in the first place, like Silicon Valley Bank, is so that AWS can assume what we call the sort of undifferentiated heavy lifting of running infrastructure. We want you, the customer, to not have to worry about that, and we want to automate that for you. And that will allow you as a company to focus on doing the things that you really want to be doing, like building and running applications that surpass your customers' expectations and experimenting with the next greatest things that will thrill them. We're also seeing a lot of companies that want to behave like cloud-native startups, even though they may not have started there, and utilize agile and DevOps practices. And at the same time, job number one is always security and compliance and minimizing risk. And we need to help you align with those mandates. An important part of the innovation story today is going to be around automation as well, right? That's going to be a theme that sort of flows through what we talk about. And this is something that Ivneet will touch on later. Customers are asking, can I provision resources with automation built in? Can I secure my applications and my data by removing costly, labor-intensive, error-prone manual operations and get my security signal-to-noise ratio under control? Can I worry less about compliance because I have an engine that continuously enforces my compliance rules? So an important part of your innovation and risk reduction strategy revolves around automation. So just a bit about the journey to the cloud. In terms of framing the narrative for our webinar today, I'm going to start by talking a little bit about the journey for our customers, a little bit about a security framework, and then our general approach to DevSecOps. So let's start with a simple model to understand how we think of the journey to the AWS cloud. So based on our experiences with millions of business customers, AWS sees organizations moving to the cloud typically in 4 stages. During the initial stage or the project phase, companies are experimenting with new projects. They're running workloads on AWS to gauge and evaluate the cloud. And this is generally done on a project-by-project basis and consists of proof of concept workloads. The foundation phase, which is typically the second phase, organizations begin to see the benefits of the cloud after sort of doing their experimentation. And they start to create the foundation for cloud success. And so this includes creating landing zones and core constructs like network connectivity, identity and access management, and other essential components. And then we get into kind of the really interesting stuff, right, which is migration, which is typically the third phase. And this is where companies begin scaling adoption and growing their cloud footprint. Companies will typically develop an application modernization strategy, figuring out which applications will be migrated and then how they'll be modernized. I'm going to come back to that after getting to our 4th stage, which is optimization. And so optimization is the 4th and the final phase typically, right? And this is where organizations begin taking full advantage of the cloud, and they're accelerating their time to market, taking advantage of things like serverless models, microservices, containerizations, and other cloud native technologies and architectures. So as you migrate and modernize sort of in the middle portion of this model, you have a few decisions to make, right? And so this is typically what we refer to as the 6 R's. And Ivneet's really going to tie this into the cloud operating model discussion that she's going to talk about for SVB. But companies, in their on-prem, there's basically 2 decisions they're making in their on-prem environment. And one is, do I retire my application altogether, right? So retire is the first one, and really it's just about removing the application altogether. The other one is retaining that application on-prem, and typically, the application is not worth modernizing because it's low value to the business, it's low impact on IT. So you're essentially keeping the application and the infrastructure it runs on as is, and you may revisit that decision in the future. As we're moving to the cloud and as we're migrating workloads to the cloud, we start to think about repurchase, or what we typically call drop and shop. And when you repurchase your application, you're essentially replacing an application. Maybe it's a security app, maybe it's an APM app, so on and so forth, something that's supporting your IP-centric applications that you own. It may be with an off-the-shelf package, and maybe through something like Marketplace, and I'll get more into Marketplace a little later. There's also rehosting, which is a typical lift and shift, and the application is going to a more modern environment for reasons like cost savings, performance gains, and ease of operations. But you're not really changing up much of the constitution of the application itself. Then there's replatform, or what we call lift and reshape. And by that we mean the application is we're modifying some of the infrastructure it uses. And a good example of this would be if you take an existing component of an application, move it to a managed service like a database service with no real changes to the business logic. And then finally, and this is my favorite one, refactoring, right, or re-architecting as we call it. So re-architecting the application is taking advantage of modern cloud services and architectures, going from monolithic to microservices, introducing more complex, sophisticated ways of building, maintaining, and modernizing your apps. Of course, this is where things get really interesting. So as you're moving into things like serverless and microservices, you need a really well-functioning DevOps practice, right? And I would argue a DevSecOps practice to make sure that as you're moving to those modern architectures and you're delivering code faster and faster and faster to many, many little specialized services. So as you get that velocity and that speed, you need to make sure that your security and compliance is keeping up with it. So each of these 6 R's, as we call them, as I mentioned, they do have a connection to what Ivnit will be talking about in the cloud operating model, right? And we have basically 3 forms of that. Sustain, which essentially means that I'm going to lift and shift with little real operational change to how I do things. There's the optimized cloud operating model, where you can think of this as sort of DevOps for the application team, where they own the full outcome of delivering and operating their applications. And then there's the grow, which is sort of more future-looking. It's more cutting-edge, around-the-corner capabilities that companies eventually may want to standardize on, but they're not quite doing it now for their major workloads. So like I said, Ivnit will provide a lot more information on that. So one of the key frameworks that Ivnit will touch on is the shared responsibility model. And that is a model that we've developed here ourselves at AWS. And this essentially means that customers, right, need to handle security in the cloud, right, while we at AWS handle the security of the cloud. I'm not going to dive too much into the security model, shared security model, because Ivnit's going to do that. But I did want to take a minute to talk about how we think about structuring prescriptive guidance on how to handle security in the cloud. So what I'm showing is based on the NIST cybersecurity framework that covers the 5 basic areas of security, and that's laid out horizontally on the bottom, right? So that's identify, protect, detect, respond, recover. And then we sort of break down the various security domains that represent the controls that are critical for those areas. So these are things like security visibility, which is about basically offering insight to customers about what's in their operating environment. So you need to be aware of the resources you have, right? You need to identify those, because if you don't know what you have, you can't secure it, you can't make it compliant, right? There's governance, risk, and compliance, or GRC, and that helps businesses reduce the amount of risk by defining, implementing, executing policies that align with corporate goals and ensure that both external and internal regulatory and compliance standards are met. Have things like ITOM, or IT Operations Management, allowing customers to achieve better visibility control around and ensuring operational stability through automated discovery, provisioning, monitoring, and remediation of things like security vulnerabilities. IAM, which is incredibly important from a governance and security perspective, which basically controls access. And you need to ensure that the right individuals and systems have appropriate access to the right resources at the right times across hybrid environments. Application security, which is near and dear to my heart as a DevSecOps specialist. And that's really about automating security and compliance in the development lifecycle, and essentially in your CI/CD systems and little bits and pieces around that. And customers typically want safer deployments through more automated code integration with continuous scanning for flaws and vulnerabilities. If I have to pick another one here, firewalls, right? So you control unauthorized access by monitoring network and application activity to just block advanced threats and prevent, lateral movements. And this includes things like proxies, web application firewalls, DDoS attacks, and so on and so forth. So this wasn't meant to be a full sort of introspective or exhaustive showing of the NIST cybersecurity framework, but I did want to let you know that this is how we think of the world when we think about security in the cloud, and this is sort of setting up Ibnit's talk on the shared responsibility model. So just, I'd be remiss if I didn't mention DevSecOps. And so I want to summarize the philosophy here without getting too much into the weeds. We could spend a whole lot of time on this. While the principles behind DevOps itself sort of revolve around automation and treating your infrastructure as code, and all the things that hold true in DevOps really hold true in the DevSecOps model. But the key here is you need to do all of these things with security and compliance and get security and compliance checks in earlier. And then automate as much of that as you can. And so from a security and compliance standpoint, before any security vulnerabilities or flaws end up getting downstream toward your production environment, and where things get trickier and costlier to fix, you want to catch all of that stuff earlier. This is sort of the shift left mentality that you've probably heard about. So these are typically married to things like IAM, right? So getting the right people access to the right parts of your pipeline, things like web application firewalls to protect against external attacks and monitoring systems, including things like Splunk and your favorite APM platforms to make sure that your performance and your performance bottlenecks are actually not due to any compliance or security policies. So just to kind of tie off on this, DevOps is a combination of cultural philosophies, and I think Ibnit's going to get into a lot of kind of how cultural transformation and people actually make things work, right? There's process to this, obviously, and this is part of the process here that you can see in the DevOps infinity band, if you will. And then there are tools, and I'll get a bit into kind of the tools that we use to typically, secure and make compliant the DevOps lifecycle. Note, just tying this back to the NIST cybersecurity framework, it's about preventative, detective, and responsive security controls. And then finally, just to reinforce this point, this really is about embedding security and compliance earlier on in your life cycle, making sure that you're doing more automated checks and taking the manual error-prone stuff out of your workflows. So with that, I'm going to turn this over to Ibnit to talk about Silicon Valley Bank and their cloud adoption journey.
Thank you so much, Matt. Hi, everyone. Very happy to be here and talk about SVB's journey to cloud. So for over 35 years, SVB has helped businesses grow and thrive across the innovation economy. We have been providing products, services, and strategic advice to help founders turn a big idea into a great business for a very long time. And we help innovators scale for growth at every stage of their journey. Our vision is to be the most sought after digital age partners to companies, influencers, and their investors in the global innovation economy, which means that we need to make sure that our services and our products can evolve and innovate at the same speed as our founders do. So I have known from my own personal experience multiple times and also watching others financial institutions going in the same direction that being in cloud gives you scale, security, flexibility, and most importantly, the ability to focus on solving customer problems rather than worrying about the infrastructure. So as at SVB, we converged around our approach to be cloud first for the future. We needed to pick a cloud provider, and we settled on AWS for many reasons. For example, their proven experience and expertise in the regulated environments, the pace of innovation within AWS itself, and last but not least, the AWS talent availability in the market. Once we made that decision, we needed to think about the right operating model to start our journey to cloud. The reason you need to think about the operating model from the beginning is because cloud migrations require an enterprise-wide mindset change to truly get the benefit of the cloud, and also to drive successful adoption. Without the right operating model, the cloud migrations can lose steam pretty quickly, and there are plenty of stories out there to prove this point. So, because in a traditional operating model, the teams are built on their core functions and activities. At the application layer, the teams are focused on application engineering, and then you have separate team focused on application operations. At the infrastructure layer, the teams are focused on infrastructure engineering, and then separate team focused on the infrastructure operations. This model is not very conducive to active and ongoing agile collaboration across roles performing different functions. It's a simpler model which can work well when supporting very mature products which do not require changes frequently or rapidly. But it doesn't work very well for cloud. So let's talk about how does this impact the cloud adoption. So most of the times, these teams have different priorities, different ways of working, and different appetite for change. Also, the finance, security, risk, and compliance functions are mostly an afterthought and not integrated into development cycle. Having all these siloed teams and functions hampers the ability to iterate quickly and fail fast, which is a must have when you are on the cloud journey. Cloud also requires you to think differently when it comes to automated governance around finance, security, compliance, and privacy controls. In most traditional models, we rely too much on manual processes and human checks and balances, which cause friction and slowness on a day to day basis. It's actually quite easy to start with technology part only when you are starting on your journey to the cloud, but very soon you realize that it is very hard to scale cloud migrations across the enterprise because you need partnerships across the enterprise with business, finance, and all the GRC functions to gain traction, to build confidence, and get the right approvals before actually going live with applications in cloud. So, as you define and bring this target operating model to life, another key component will be having a very strong change management strategy. And we will talk about that as we dig deeper. Now, we all understand that the cloud based technologies and DevOps practices are necessary ingredients for success. But how do we take a large organization accustomed to working in a specific way and change everything it knows about infrastructure, operations, and software delivery? The key to that is having a dedicated cross functional team under a single leader with a singular vision and focus of driving cloud migration and cloud adoption across the enterprises. The reason for that is because when you're starting on this cloud journey, and even when you're going through it for quite some time, you must find a way to make deep changes scale broadly until they reach a critical mass. Pockets of innovation, as a general rule, don't have the leverage it takes to cause a global change. You need a driver of change across the organization and a focal point of transformation which is broad as well as deep. So in our case, we call it the Cloud Center of Excellence. And our CCOE is helping SPB to move towards a DevSec Ops operating model, which you heard a lot about from Matt during his conversation. Why DevSec Ops? I think we all know that it encourages much closer collaboration between different teams. So in our case, what we have done is we have done the aggregation of different roles and capabilities into our CCOE to ensure very tight collaboration across all different areas. Now, rather than having many different siloed teams, we have very, very few cross-functional teams, and even they are dedicatedly merged into the CCOE. And these teams are responsible for supporting what they build, which is very different than the traditional operating model, which we talked about in the previous slide. Right now at SVB, we are focused on building the enterprise cloud foundations from an infrastructure perspective. At the same time, from a people and process side, we are also taking an agile approach to iterating on the team construct and size to meet demand and to drive expected value. So today, our cloud platform engineering team has the straight line reporting structure into the cloud leader. This team has infrastructure engineers, architects, cloud security engineers, and solution architects, along with finance and other governance skill sets as part of the team. We also have dedicated resources from other functions like an on-prem network, cybersecurity, IAM, and privacy, etc., so that this CCOE is building to the entire scope with all the right controls there from the get-go. We also have a cloud business office as part of the CCOE to manage our backlog, drive financial governance, training, and then overall organizational change management. So having one center drive both the build of the platform as well as the overall governance has been the primary ingredients in our ability to build the enterprise cloud platform the right way and also to be able to drive adoption at scale. We are a bank, so thinking about overall security, managing risk, and being compliant is really job number one for us. So I'll be remiss if I did not talk about the shared responsibility between AWS and SVB. So Matt talked about this a little bit. So since AWS and its customers share control over the technology environment, both parties have responsibility for managing the overall technology environment. AWS in the shared responsibility model includes providing its services on a highly secure and controlled platform and providing a wide array of security features the customers can use. Our responsibility includes building these technology environments in a secure and controlled manner for our purposes. So it's really critical to get a deep understanding of what AWS provides and what needs to be built by the enterprise. So as you can see on your screen also, that we as a company still need to have a lot of work to do to build the right guardrails and controls for our applications and our data every step of the way. So what does that really mean? So understanding shared responsibility model starts with us looking at all layers of the cloud environment so that we can define our approach to overall DevSec Ops, all governance needs, and observability. So for example, we need to define how we want to manage creation and governance of cloud accounts and bake base security, privacy, and compliance controls requirements in our base infrastructure and services from the get-go. We also need to think about what is our deployment strategy for different applications. Matt talked about 6Rs. So which one of those are we going to be able to do for our stack? What kind of architecture patterns do they need to follow? What are the customer expectations from the application in terms of functionality, speed, and resiliency? What kind of regulations the applications, and so on and so forth. So this shared responsibility model can be quite complex if not properly planned. It's a multi-part challenge, which is broad as well as deep. Building and managing cloud environments requires very strong coordination between different teams to ensure that the right tools and processes are established that support agility, governance, and observability. It is critical to have a well-architected and well-connected architecture across all these areas. So let's get into a little bit more of the meat of what I mean here. So let's talk about one of the things, which is DevOps. So that starts with identifying the multi-account platform automation tools for end-to-end enablement of infrastructure as code, security policies as code, and application code deployment. So like in our case, we needed to make a decision between AWS landing zone versus Terraform landing zone versus AWS control tower. So there were many choices, and we decided to go with Terraform landing zone because we wanted to have automated deployment of infrastructure, an API-driven infrastructure, and also have the ability to use containers and other third-party tools as part of our overall ecosystem. We also needed to think about having strong source code management and a CI/CD orchestrator, and we decided to use GitLab for that. We will have a completely automated approach to vend consistent accounts with all the GRC control baked in, and a strong approval process to make sure that we have the right checks and balances in place while automating the entire flow of account provisioning. And that was one of the primary goals we set for ourselves when we started on this journey. We also decided to have a service catalog based approach where we are baking all the areas that we talked about, DevSecOps, governance, and observability, as part of the AWS service itself. The reason for that is we want to make sure that when a development team instantiates an AWS service, the service is already built with our standards. And the developers can focus on the business application logic and the application level security, but they don't have to worry about all the other things. Now, if we think about governance and security piece, as a bank, it's critical for us to ensure that the GRC controls are baked in all layers, starting from the foundational resources, whether it's VPCs, it's IAM and logging, and then all the way to the application deployment. Developing operational playbooks and runbooks for all these things is a key part of our strategy. What I do want to emphasize also is that it's critical to have the ability to identify the regulatory controls and also the ability for your second line of defense to validate these controls for your foundational infrastructure as well as your business application. So this is one of the main reasons you want to make sure that the second line of defense has the ability to approve, test, monitor, and audit in an automated fashion so that you can achieve agility with the right level of risk management. When we talk about the above two, one of the core things which brings everything together is observability. So this plays a key role to ensure that all the systems are functioning as designed. The observability features should be built from the get-go because it takes much longer to build the monitoring, the reporting, and alerting capabilities after the fact. In our case, as we were starting our journey and we were defining the architecture, we made sure of a few things. So we made sure that we had very tight coordination and integration with our network, IAM, security, and then GRC groups, along with second line of defense from day one. We also made sure that we were picking and integrating a very comprehensive set of monitoring and alerting tools in the account provisioning itself and as well as in the service catalog. We can talk about technology for a long time. I think we all get very, very excited when we talk about those things. But it always comes back to people and process. It will be almost impossible to execute everything that I talked about without the right people in place and without these people being empowered from a target operating model perspective. So start there and ensure that you have the right teams enabled to support all these areas with a very strong change management and upskilling strategy. Because training and upskilling various teams along with the right target operating model and the right architecture plays a very critical role in the success of cloud adoption. This starts with establishing a customized training plan for different teams along with operational playbooks and runbooks for faster adoption. We at SVB had to do a pretty heavy lifting to set up the initial cloud COE operating model. It took us a while to get the buy-in and then also to get the right talent. We also had to make sure that we were providing dedicated support to our network security and GRC function to basically share with them how are things different in cloud, how should they work, and then this journey of support and training is going to continue for a while for us as our application teams now ramp up to take advantage of the enterprise cloud platform. And in that case also, we are very heavily focused on training, change management, and then overall mindset shift. So, based on everything that we talked about, my key takeaways based on our journey are: empower a dedicated cloud center of excellence team to drive the adoption. Focus on having a very solid and detailed end-to-end reference architecture covering all the different areas that we talked about. Do not underestimate the importance of change management. It's a huge mindset shift for most of the organization, and you need to be able to take people from point A to point B and do it multiple times. Uh, and then you have heard this before: automate, automate, automate. If you can help it, do not leave anything manual. Even if you have the right uh, adoption controls and approval controls built along the way, you want to automate as much of everything as possible. And then last but not least, try to have fun. You will have the wins and you will have the failures. It will be a bit bumpy before you hit your stride, but it is well worth the effort when you see the business agility increasing leaps and bounds, and our customers actually getting really great products from us with our journey to the cloud. With that, I will hand it back to Matt to talk about some other interesting things.
So thanks, Avneet, for taking us through the sort of cloud migration adoption, DevSecOps journey for Silicon Valley Bank. Incredible reference architecture, incredible amount of thinking that went into, or thoughtfulness, I should say, that went into how you've helped to digitally transform Silicon Valley Bank. And I think our customers will get a lot out of that. The way that I wanted to sort of finish this off was just for, a little bit of a pitch for Marketplace, which is where I work for, and where we see customers actually getting a lot of value when they think about migrating to the cloud. And we mentioned kind of one of the R's was repurchase, right? So with all that Avneet talked about, you may be thinking to yourselves, how great would it be to have an easy way to find, try, and if you want at any point to procure and deploy third-party applications via an AWS service. Well, you can do that, and the service is called AWS Marketplace. Part of the journey that you'll undertake as a customer journeying to the cloud is to understand where it makes sense for you to adopt cloud-friendly options to help replace things like perpetual licenses with subscription-based licensing, a SaaS offering that where you no longer need to manage, the installation, maintenance, and updates of that software yourself. And this is all part of the modernization strategy for those apps that you don't build, all of what I call the supporting cast for those apps. And these are the applications that are necessary to keep your IP, right, performing well, secure, and compliant. And so just quickly, Marketplace, there are hundreds of seller solutions available, and you can see just a smattering of what we have here across the different views of DevSec and Ops. And they align with the key functions of the cloud operating model and other frameworks that we've discussed today. It's really a curated digital software catalog that helps you find, test, buy, and provision software and data products. And then these solutions can be integrated with your existing AWS services. And so that's important, as Avneet showed you. There are a lot of AWS native services that she works with. There are third-party services that she works with. We allow you to work with both of them harmoniously. And so you can deploy a comprehensive security architecture across your entire AWS and on-prem environments. And with that, I'd like to thank you for sort of participating with us in this presentation. And just in case you wanted to have a reminder of who we are, I'm Matt Giordari. You can contact me at AWS. Avneet Kaur is the CTO for Silicon Valley Bank, and a special thanks to Somasundra and Subbu, who helped put together our presentation and check, our logic on this. So thank you very much.